At 75, Odessa Fairbanks learned that her family had decided she was a problem to be solved. Her son measured her room with a tape measure while she was still sitting in it, already imagining the office it would become. They handed her a brochure for a place with meal plans and craft hours and a parking lot full of sedans, and they called it generosity. The only thing she took that nobody fought her for was a rusted key to a piece of land everyone in the family agreed was worthless. A collapsing homestead her grandmother had left her, swallowed by weeds and forgotten by maps. They thought they were getting rid of dead weight. They had no idea what was sealed behind a brick wall on that property, waiting 80 years for someone stubborn enough to find it. Stay with me, because the day the world finally understood what Odessa had uncovered, the same people who threw her away were the ones standing at her gate, asking to be let back in. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The conversation happened on a Thursday, which Odessa would remember later because Thursday was the day she usually made the apple bread, and she never got to finish it. She had the bowl out, flour on her hands. Royce came into the kitchen with that particular walk he had when he wanted something, the slow one, and behind him came Sloane, who never came into the kitchen at all unless she was looking for the good olive oil. They sat down at the table. Royce folded his hands on the placemat like a man about to read a verdict, and Odessa understood, the way you understand weather, that whatever came next had been discussed without her in rooms she wasn't allowed into. "Mom, sit down a sec. We want to talk to you about something." She wiped her hands on the dish towel and sat. She did not fill the silence. She had raised this boy. She knew his pauses. "So, you know the business has been growing." Royce glanced at his wife. "We're at the point where I really need a dedicated office. A real one, with a door that closes, not the corner of the dining room. And the thing is, the only room in the house that makes sense for it is, well, it's yours." "My room," Odessa said. "Your room. And before you say anything, we've thought about this a lot. We're not just turning you out into the street." He laughed a little, as if she'd suggested it. "There's a place out on Route 9. Birch Meadows. It's really nice, Mom. They've got people your age, activities, somebody on call all night, if anything happens. You'd have your own little apartment. No stairs." Sloane slid a glossy trifold across the table. On the cover, a silver-haired woman laughed at something off-camera, holding a watercolor brush. The light was very golden. Nobody in the photograph looked like they lived there. Odessa did not touch it. She had given this family the down payment on this house. For years ago, when Royce's first company folded and the bank was circling, she had sold the home she and her husband Gerald had lived in for 31 years. The home where she'd buried 2 cats under the dogwood and measured Royce's height in pencil on the pantry door frame. She had handed over the proceeds and moved into the back bedroom and told herself it was temporary, the way you tell yourself a lot of things. That was 4 years ago. The business had recovered. Then it had thrived. The kitchen had been gutted and rebuilt in white quartz. The yard had a landscaper now. And somewhere in all that renovation, she had stopped being Royce's mother and become a square footage problem. "You want my room for an office," she said. "It's not like that." Royce's jaw tightened. "You're 75, Mom. What happens if you fall on those stairs when we're not home? What happens when Sloane and I take the kids to the lake and you're here alone and something goes wrong? We can't carry that. We have to be realistic about where you are in life." Where you are in life. As though she were a pin on a map and the map only went one direction. She looked at her son for a long moment. He had Gerald's hairline and her own stubborn chin, and somewhere under the expensive shirt was the 8-year-old who used to climb in her lap during thunderstorms. She could not find him. The man at the table had already signed the paperwork in his head. "When," she said, "they have an opening on the 1st of next month. We'd help you move, get you all set up." Sloane spoke for the first time, gentle, rehearsed. "It really is for the best, Odessa. You'll make friends." Odessa nodded slowly. Then she asked a question that made both of them blink. "What about my grandmother's place? The one up at Stillwater Gap?" Royce actually laughed. "Mom, that place is a teardown. We looked into it when Grandma's estate got settled. Remember? You can't get a loan on it. You can't insure it. The access road washes out half the year. The county won't even take it for back taxes because it's not worth the paperwork. It's a pile of rotten lumber and poison ivy on a hill nobody can find. But it's mine. Technically sure, but then that's where I'll go. The kitchen went quiet. The mixer ticked as the bowl cooled. Somewhere upstairs, one of the grandchildren, Posey or Toby, dropped something and laughed. "You're not serious?" Royce said. "I'm completely serious. You want my room? Fine, you can have it. But I'm not going to Birch Meadows to paint watercolors with strangers and wait. I'm going to my grandmother's house. There's no power out there. No water. The roof's probably caved in. A woman your age, alone, in the middle of nowhere. That's not independence, Mom. That's a 911 call waiting to happen." He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. "I'm trying to help you, and you're making it impossible. If you can't make a safe decision for yourself, then maybe somebody else needs to be making them for you. Legally. Do you understand what I'm saying?" And there it was. The quiet little threat slid across the table like the brochure. Guardianship. He'd look into that too, then. Odessa stood up. Her knees complained the way they did, and she ignored them the way she did. She picked up the dish towel, folded it once, and set it on the counter beside the unfinished bread. "I'll be gone by Sunday," she said. "You won't have to lift a finger, and you won't have to visit. Consider whatever you think you owe me paid in full." "Mom, don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic, Royce. I'm being done." She walked to the doorway and stopped, not turning around. "You should finish that bread. It's a shame to waste good apples." Then she went upstairs to the room that was already an office in her son's mind, took the shoebox down from the top of the closet where she kept the things that mattered, and underneath the photographs and Gerald's watch, she found the small iron key her grandmother had pressed in her palm a lifetime ago, with a name scratched into the tag in handwriting she'd almost forgotten. She held it in her hand until it stopped feeling cold. Sunday came gray and cool. Odessa was up before the birds, packing the last of her boxes by the light of the hallway lamp so she wouldn't wake anyone, though waking them was the least of her worries now. Hollis Tran showed up at 7 with his pickup and a horse trailer he'd borrowed from his brother-in-law. Hollis lived 2 doors down and had known Gerald from the volunteer fire department, and when Odessa had called him Friday and asked, plainly, whether he'd help her move some things to her grandmother's old place, he had not asked a single nosy question. He just said, "What time?" They loaded in near silence. The recliner, the cedar chest, for boxes of books, her sewing things, the framed photo of Gerald in his good suit. It did not amount to much, 75 years of a life when you set it in the bed of truck. Royce came down in his robe and stood on the porch with his coffee and watched. And at one point he said, "Mom, this is insane, you know that," and Odessa kept walking boxes to the truck and did not answer him because there was nothing left in her to spend on it. The children came out in their pajamas. Posey, who was 9, didn't fully understand and hugged her around the waist and asked when she was coming back. Toby, who was 13 and understood more than the adults gave him credit for, stood off to the side with his arms crossed and a look on his face that Odessa recognized as the particular fury of a young person watching grown-ups do something wrong and being too small to stop it. She kissed the top of Posey's head and squeezed Toby's shoulder. "You know where I'll be," she told him. "When you're old enough to drive yourself, you come find me." Then she climbed into the cab of Hollis's truck, and they pulled out, and she did not look back at the house with the white quartz kitchen because she had already done all her looking. The drive took the better part of 2 hours. They went out past the box stores and the new subdivisions, then onto the state highway, then off that onto a county road that narrowed and roughened until the center line gave up entirely. Stillwater Gap was not on the way to anywhere. That was the thing about it. You did not pass through Stillwater Gap. You went there on purpose or you never went at all. The trees crowded in close, hickory and tulip poplar and tangled rhododendron, and the morning light came down through them in pieces. Hollis drove with both hands on the wheel and finally said what he'd been chewing on since 7. "You want me to say it, or you want me to keep it to myself?" "Say it." Royce ought to be ashamed. Gerald would have taken a strip off him. He shook his head. "A man puts his own mother out so he can have a bigger office. I've seen some things, Odessa, but that one's going to sit with me." "He didn't think he was putting me out," she said, watching the trees. "He thought he was being responsible. That's the part that I can't get past. He had a whole speech about how it was for my own good. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For your own good, Hollis repeated. Lord, the pavement ended. They bumped along a gravel track for a mile. Then the gravel gave way to packed red dirt rutted deep from the spring rains, and the truck pitched and groaned, and the horse trailer behind them swayed like a drunk. Branches scraped the roof. Odessa held the door handle and felt something in her chest she had not expected to feel, which was not fear at all. It was closer to recognition. She had been down this road before, 60 years ago, in the back of her father's Ford, with the windows down and her grandmother's voice calling out the names of the plants as they passed. Then the trees opened. The clearing sat on a south-facing slope, and the house stood at the top of it, or what was left of the house. 2 stories, the white clapboard gone gray and green, the porch sagging on one corner like a sprained ankle. Vines had climbed the whole east wall and pried under the eaves. The windows were filmed and dark. Off behind it slumped a low outbuilding, half its roof on the ground, and beyond it the fields ran wild, chest-high in broomsedge and blackberry cane and saplings as thick as Odessa's wrist. A split-rail fence showed through the weeds here, and they're like the spine of something long dead. Hollis cut the engine. The silence afterward was enormous. He let out a low whistle. Odessa, I'll be honest with you. I can turn this truck around right now, and you can stay in my spare room as long as you need. No rent, no questions. You don't have to prove anything to anybody. She looked at the house her grandmother had lived in for 50 years, the house where she herself had spent every summer of her childhood, and she felt the iron key in her coat pocket, warm now from her hand. I'm not proving anything, she said. I'm going home. The front door was swollen shut. It took both of them, Hollis with his shoulder and Odessa pushing on the iron handle, before it gave with a groan and a shower of paint flakes, and let them into the dim. The smell hit her first. Dust and old wood and something mineral underneath, the smell of a house that has been holding its breath for years. Hollis swept his flashlight around. Sheets draped the furniture in the front room, gone yellow-gray, and beneath them the shapes of chairs and a settee, and a tall case clock stopped at some forgotten hour. The hardwood floors were sound under a carpet of grit. A stone fireplace took up most of the far wall, and above it, where a mirror or a painting must once have hung, a paler rectangle on the smoke-darkened plaster. It should have been bleak. Somehow it wasn't. The bones were good. Odessa had grown up in houses like this, had learned the difference between a house that was dying and a house that was only neglected, and this one, for all its sag and grime, was merely waiting. They carried in what they could before dark. Hollis got the generator running long enough to test it, showed her how to choke it and where he'd stack the gas cans, and walked the first floor with her once more, frowning at the water stains blooming brown across the kitchen ceiling. Roof's letting go up there, he said. Not collapsed, but it's coming. You'll want a tarp before the next big rain. He looked at her. I'll come back midweek. Bring my. She'll want to fuss over you, and I'll bring tools and we'll get that tarp up and look at the well. Don't argue. I wasn't going to argue. That's a first. He almost smiled. At the door, he hesitated. You sure about tonight? It'll be black as a coal cellar out here once I'm gone. No street lights. No neighbors close enough to hear a thing. That's rather the point, Hollis. He left a little before sundown. She listened to the truck grind back down the dirt track until the sound thinned and vanished. And then there was only the house and her and the enormous quiet of the slope settling into evening. She did not light the generator. She found her camping lantern instead, the kind with the soft, warm bulb, and she pulled the sheet off the settee and beat the dust out of it on the porch rail until her arms ached, and she made up a bed of sorts with her own quilt and pillow. She set a can of soup on the little propane burner Hollis had unloaded and ate it straight from the pot on the porch steps, watching the light drain out of the sky behind the ridgeline. The fields went gold, then rose, then a deep bruised blue. The first stars came out, and then more than she had any name for, a spilled bowl of them, because there was nothing out here to drown them. In the city, you forgot the stars were even up there. Here there were almost too many, almost crowding. A whip pour will start it up somewhere, down the slope. 3 notes over and over, the sound of every childhood summer she had ever had. Farther off, an owl. The air came up off the cooling ground smelling of green and dirt, and the first faint sweetness of honeysuckle gone wild along the fence line. She had expected to be afraid. She had braced for it on the drive up, had rehearsed how she would manage the fear when it came, a 75-year-old woman alone on a mountain with a failing roof and no telephone signal, and a son who thought she was a danger to herself. The fear did not come. What came instead, sitting on those rotten steps with an empty soup can cooling in her hands, was something she had not felt in 4 years and had to sit with for a while before she could even put a name to it. There was no one upstairs whose footsteps she was tracking, no one whose mood she was reading from the set of their shoulders, no one deciding, in rooms she couldn't enter, what was to become of her. She had stopped, without realizing it, holding herself small. She had been folding herself smaller and smaller for 4 years to take up less room in a house that did not want her. And now there was a whole dark mountain around her, and she could be exactly as large as she pleased. It was freedom. That was the word. It tasted strange in her mouth, the way a word does when you have not used it about yourself in a very long time. She cried a little there in the dark. Not for the house, and not even quite for Royce, but for the version of herself that had nearly gotten on a bus to Birch Meadows and let it happen, had nearly believed them when they said her time was over. That woman had come very close to existing. Odessa grieved her a little, the way you grieve a near miss. And then she wiped her face on her sleeve, because there's only so long a practical woman will sit and weep, and she went inside, and she lay down on her grandmother's settee under her own quilt, and she listened to the house tick and breathe around her. Just before sleep took her, she saw the key in her coat pocket and the name scratched on its tag, and she thought, "Tomorrow I'll find out what you go to." She slept better than she had in years. Morning came loud. After years of city dawns muffled by traffic, the chorus of birds on the slope was almost an assault, and Odessa woke stiff on the settee, with light pouring through the grimy windows and a crick in her neck that took 10 minutes of careful stretching to coax out. 75-year-old bones did not forgive a hard night the way younger ones did. She made her tea on the propane burner, and she sat on the porch with both hands around the warm mug, and she made a list in her head, because a list was how you ate an impossible thing one bite at a time. Water, roof, a way to wash, a way to keep food cold. The first of these she solved within the week. She had remembered, half remembered, a spring on the property, and she found it where her body told her it would be, in a low fold of ground 100 yards below the house. The water seeping clear and cold out of the rock into a stone basin her great-grandfather must have set there a century ago. She filtered it, boiled it, carried it up the slope in 2 plastic jugs that grew heavier with every step, and she learned very quickly to make fewer trips with more thought. Hollis came back on Wednesday with Mai and a truck bed full of tools and a propane refrigerator and a tarp the size of a sail. Mai took one look at the kitchen and rolled up her sleeves, and by the time the men had the tarp lashed over the worst of the roof, the wood stove was cleaned out and drawing, and there was bread baking in it, and the house smelled for the first time in years like a place where someone lived. After that, Odessa settled into the rhythm of it. She could not work the way she had at 40. She knew that, and she did not fight it because fighting your own body is a young person's mistake. She worked the way an old woman works, which is to say steadily, in the cool of the morning and the cool of the evening, and not at all in the heat of the afternoon. She tackled the land in small squares, one patch at a time, hacking back the blackberry cane and grubbing out the saplings and hauling the brush to a burn pile that grew taller by the day. Her palms blistered and tore and bled, and then, over a couple of weeks, hardened into something that didn't. Her back ached every single night. She fell asleep before full dark, most evenings, and woke before the birds, and there was a satisfaction in that exhaustion she had forgotten the taste of, because she was building something. With her own 2 hands, at 75, she was making order out of ruin, and every cleared square of ground was proof that she was not finished, not obsolete, not a square footage problem to be relocated. The work talked back to her in the only language she trusted, which was results. Royce called once. The signal up at the gap was so poor she had to walk to the top of the slope and hold the phone over her head to get 2 bars, and she only bothered because she saw it was him. "Mom, you made your point. Everybody's seen you can be stubborn. Come home. We'll figure something out. You don't have to live like a pioneer." "I'm not making a point, Royce. I'm living my life. You don't have running water. I have a spring older than the state of North Carolina. I'm managing. For how long? It's spring now. What happens in January? What happens when you fall and there's nobody for miles? Then I suppose I'll handle it. The way I've handled everything else. She watched a hawk turn slow circles over the far field. I have to go. I've got work. She hung up before he could find the next argument. She did not need his doubt narrated to her. She had plenty of her own, late at night, and she did not require the supplement. As she cleared the land, she began to read it the way her grandmother had taught her to read it 60 years ago, on summer mornings just like these. The soil here was dark and deep and smelled alive when she turned it. The wild things grew thick and vigorous, which meant the ground beneath was not worn out, but only sleeping. Water moved through the slope the right way. Somebody, long ago, had chosen this site with great care, and the house kept giving up small clues. A heavy iron ring set into the foundation stone for no reason she could see. Cabinets in the back pantry built unusually deep, their shelves stained with rings of color, ochre and a strange deep green that no jar of preserves would leave. A bricked-over rectangle in the wall of the rear room, plastered and painted over but raised just slightly proud of the surrounding wall, so that the afternoon light caught its edge. She noticed these things the way you notice a name on the tip of your tongue. Her grandmother had not been an ordinary farm wife. Odessa had always known that, in the vague way children know things about adults, but she had never asked the right questions, and then her grandmother was gone, and then it was 40 years later, and Odessa was standing in the woman's kitchen with a key in her pocket that fit no door she had yet found. She did not know it yet, but she was 3 weeks and one stubborn afternoon away from finding out exactly what her family had thrown away. It was the rectangle in the back room that finally got her. She had been avoiding that room. It had been her grandmother's, and then her great-aunt's, the room where the last of the old women had spent their final years, and something about it asked to be left in peace. But the rain had come hard one night and found a gap Hollis's tarp hadn't covered, and the water had run down the rear wall and lifted the old paint in long curling sheets. And in the morning Odessa stood looking at that raised rectangle with the plaster sloughing off it, and she could no longer pretend she didn't see it. She fetched the flat bar from Hollis's lone toolbox and a hammer and a dust mask, and she went at the plaster. It came away in chunks, and under was brick. Soft, old, handmade brick, mortared rough, walling up an opening about waist-high and twice as wide, set into what she now understood was an unusually thick interior wall. Somebody had sealed this on purpose, and then disguised the ceiling, and then let 40 years of paint and neglect finish the job. Her heart was going hard, and not from the work. She did not rush it. She was too old to be foolish about a thing that had waited this long. She worked one brick loose, then its neighbor, prying at the crumbling mortar, easing them out and stacking them on a towel so as not to crack the floor. The dark mouth of the opening grew. Cold air breathed out of it, and that mineral smell from her first night in the house, only stronger now, the smell of clay and ash and something fired. When the gap was big enough, she shone the flashlight in. It was a small room. No, not a room. A workshop, low ceiling, dug partly into the slope behind the house, so the back of it was earth and stone. And, squatting in the center of it, patient as a sleeping animal, was a kiln. A real one, brick-built, beehive-shaped, with an iron door and a flue running up into the chimney she'd thought belonged only to the fireplace. Around it, on plank shelves furred with dust, stood the shapes of pots. Odessa pulled bricks until the opening would take her, and then she climbed through, knees and all, and stood up inside her grandmother's secret. The flashlight beam moved across the shelves, and her breath went out of her. They were beautiful. That was the plain first fact of them, before she understood anything else. Bowls and jars and tall lidded vessels, dozens of them, glazed in color she had never seen come out of any store. A deep luminous green, like the inside of a wave. An orange that held light like a coal. A blue-black that seemed to have depth you could fall into, scattered through with tiny flecks that caught the beam like mica. Some pieces were plain, and some were carved, incised with patterns, vines and stars, and a repeating mark like a bird in flight, and every one of them was made by a hand that knew exactly what it was doing. On the workbench lay tools, wooden ribs and metal scrapers, and a potter's needle gone to rust. A wheel sat in the corner, the old kit kind, its flywheel thick with dust. And on a shelf above the bench, wrapped in oilcloth gone stiff with age, was a stack of ledgers. She carried them out into the light, because her hand was shaking too much to read by flashlight. She sat at the kitchen table and unwrapped them and opened the first, and her grandmother's handwriting rose up off the page and put a hand around her throat. Page after page of it. Recipes, but not for food. Glaze recipes, exact to the gram, columns of mineral names and proportions, and firing temperatures, and little notes in the margin. Ash from the wood stove, sifted twice. Too hot. Ran thin, lost the speckle. The green wants a slow cool, or it goes dull. Drawings of the pieces, with notes on which clay, which glaze, which firing. And dates running back, the earliest she found, to 1931. Her grandmother, who everyone in the family remembered as a quiet country woman who put up beans and went to church and never said much, had been a potter. Not a hobbyist, a master. 40 years of disciplined, documented work sealed up behind a wall. The last ledger was thinner, and its final entry was dated the autumn of 1983, the year Odessa's grandmother had died. The handwriting had gone shaky by then, but the words were steady. I am too old now to fire the big kiln, and there is no one to leave this to. My daughter has her city life and would only feel burdened by it, and I will not do that to her. The county men who came said the work was old-fashioned and worth nothing, and perhaps to them it is. So I'm closing it up. The clay is in the ground here, the same as it always was. The recipes are all here for anyone with the patience to read them. If these pots are meant to be seen again, someone will come who knows how to look. And if not, then I made beautiful things for their own sake, in my own time, and that was never wasted. Some work waits longer than a life. That is all right. Odessa sat in the failing light with the ledger open in her lap and read those lines until she could not see them through her tears. Someone will come who knows how to look. She had come. After everything, she had come. She started the way her grandmother told her to, which was to say at the beginning, with the clay. The ledger marked the clay pit on a hand-drawn map, down past the spring where the bank cut steep and the earth showed gray-blue under the topsoil. Odessa dug a bucket of it and brought it up and worked it the way the notes described, picking out the roots and pebbles, wedging it on the old playing table until her shoulders burned, learning by feel what the words could only point at. It was humbling. She had thrown a few pots at a community center class 30 years ago and thought she remembered something. She remembered almost nothing. Her first dozen attempts on the kick will collapsed into wet ruin, and she scraped them up and wedged them back into the lump and tried again, because the clay forgave you endlessly so long as you hadn't fired it. Hollis got the wheel turning smooth again and rigged a tarp porch so she could work in the rain. Mike came up some afternoons, and they sat together at the bench, two women in their 70s, covered to the elbow in gray slip, and laughed at the lopsided bowls, and it was the best company Odessa had kept in years. The glazes were the hard part. Her grandmother's recipes called for materials with old names, and some of them Odessa had to puzzle out, and some she ordered in from a pottery supply 3 counties over that thought she was somebody's granddaughter calling on her behalf. The wood ash she could make herself. The stove gave her plenty. She mixed test batches by the gram, painted them on shard tiles, and stacked the tiles in the small kiln for trial firings, and she failed and failed and failed. The green ran off the tiles in ugly streaks. The orange came out the color of a brick driveway. A whole firing cracked because she'd cooled it too fast, and she sat among the broken tiles and nearly let herself believe Royce had been right about everything. An old woman, alone, chasing a dead woman's ghost up a mountain. The thought had teeth, late at night. But the ledger kept her honest. The green wants a slow cool. She read it again and understood it differently the third time, the way you do. She built the fire smaller and let the kiln come down over a day and a night instead of an afternoon. And when she opened it the next morning, the test tile was the deep, luminous green of the inside of a wave, exactly as her grandmother had written, exactly as the sealed pots had shown her. She sat down right there on the cold ground and wept for the second time on that mountain, and this time it was nothing like grief. After that, it came faster. Not fast, nothing about it was fast, but the failure started teaching instead of just defeating. By midsummer, she had thrown and trimmed and dried a dozen pieces she wasn't ashamed of, bowls mostly, a few small jars, and she glazed them in her grandmother's green and her grandmother's coal orange, and she loaded the big beehive kiln for the first time in 41 years. It took 2 days to fire. She fed it and watched it and slept beside it in a lawn chair, reading the color of the flame through the spy hole the way the ledger taught her, and when it was done, she bricked up the door and made herself wait the full day and a half for it to cool, which was the hardest patience of her life. When she pulled the first piece out, a wide, shallow bowl, the green so deep it looked wet, ringing faintly when she tapped it, she held it in both hands and understood her grandmother completely across 40 years in the grave. There was no one to show. That was almost the point. She had made a beautiful thing in her own time, with her own hands at 75, and it would have been enough even if no one ever saw it. But Mai saw it, and Mai, who had a teenage granddaughter and therefore a phone, took a photograph of Odessa holding that bowl in the doorway of the workshop and said, "Odessa, people need to see this." So they posted it. Mai's granddaughter set up the account and wrote the words Odessa dictated. "My grandmother made this kind of pottery on this mountain for 50 years. She sealed her workshop up in 1983, and everyone forgot. This summer, I learned her recipes and fired her kiln again. This bowl came out yesterday. Odessa expected nothing. Mai would see it. Maybe a cousin." Within 2 days, the photograph had been shared past counting. The comments filled with people who knew things, who used words she had to look up. By the end of the week, a woman named Dr. Lorena Vega, a curator of folk art at the State Museum, had driven the washed-out road herself, climbed through the gap in the brick wall with a flashlight clamped in her teeth, and come back out white-faced and quiet. She turned a small coal orange jar over in her gloved hands like it might break her instead of the other way around. "Mrs. Fairbanks," she said, "I need you to understand what you have. This glaze, this whole tradition, we thought it died out before the war. There are 3 pieces like this in any museum in the country, and the maker was listed as unknown." She looked up. "Your grandmother wasn't unknown. She was just hidden, and you found her." Dr. Vega did not come a take. She made that clear within the first hour, and it was the thing that won Odessa over. There were offers after the museum visit and after the small piece Dr. Vega published with photographs that traveled further than the first post ever had. Collectors called. A gallery in Asheville wanted the whole sealed collection on consignment and named a figure that made Odessa sit down. A man from somewhere up north offered to buy the pots, the kiln, the recipes, the land, the lot, for a number with too many zeros to feel real. She said no to all of it. The no was easy because she had read the last ledger entry so many times she could recite it. Her grandmother had not made these things to be sold off the mountain to a man who would lock them in a climate-controlled room. She had made them to be made and to be seen and to go on. So Odessa made a different kind of arrangement. She kept the land and the collection and her grandmother's name on all of it, and the museum sent help instead of money. A young conservator to stabilize the oldest pieces, a grant to rebuild the workshop properly, advice on how to set the whole thing up as a nonprofit so it could outlast her. By autumn, there was real power to the house and a proper well pump and a second kiln, and the bricked-up wall stood open now with a timber frame around it, like the door it had always secretly been. And the people started coming. Not tour buses, though those would come later, and Odessa would grumble about them. At first, it was just women. Older women, mostly from the little towns down the mountain, and then from further off, who had read about the 75-year-old who dug a dead woman's craft out of a wall, and who showed up with the particular look Odessa recognized from her own mirror 4 years ago. The look of someone who has been told, in 100 small ways, that their useful years are behind them. The first was Faye Lindqvist, 78, who'd buried a husband and outlived most of her friends and announced at the gate that she had thrown pots in art school in 1965 and had not touched clay since, and would Odessa mind terribly if she sat in. Faye was sharp as a tack and twice as pointed, and she took one look at Odessa hauling a glazed bucket and said, "You're doing that wrong. You'll wreck your shoulder," and proceeded to show her a better way, and the two of them were thick as thieves by sundown. Then came Geneva Pruitt, quiet, careful, who'd taught high school chemistry for 30 years and turned out to have exactly the mind for glaze formulation, and who began keeping the records the way Margaret's old ledgers were kept, only now in a clean new book in a clean new hand. And Marisol Quintero, the youngest of the regulars at 61, who'd lost her restaurant in a divorce and her sense of herself along with it, and who had a gift for the wheel that left even Faye quiet. Odessa started teaching. She had not planned to. It simply happened the way the cleared land had happened, one square at a time. She taught what her grandmother's ledgers taught her, the patience of it, the reading of fire and color, the long, slow cool. The women taught each other. They brought casseroles and folding chairs and stories, and the workshop that had stood sealed and silent for 40 years filled up with the sound of the wheel and the kiln and women laughing. The property that Royce had called a teardown, that the county wouldn't take for back taxes, was appraised that winter for insurance at a number that would have bought 3 of his white quartz kitchens. Not for the land, for what was on it, and what was made there now. Odessa was interviewed. A magazine sent a photographer who spent a whole golden afternoon and used one picture. A documentary crew asked to come, and she let them on the condition that they filmed the work and the women and not just her. She was asked to speak at things in cities, and she declined most of it. "Let them come up here if they want the story," she told Faye, the two of them shelling beans on the rebuilt porch. "This place is the story. I'm just the one who happened to have the key." But she was the story too, and she knew it, and she made her peace with it because it served a purpose. Every time her face was on a screen, another woman somewhere who'd been folded small and set on a shelf saw it and thought, perhaps not yet then, perhaps not yet. That was worth more than her dignity about the photographs. What she never did, not once, was forget the kitchen table, the tape measure, the brochure with the golden light. She did not let it sour her, but she did not let it go either, because it had taught her something true about how the world looked at women her age, and she had built this whole mountain into an argument against it. She was 76 now. Her hands were stronger than they'd been at 60, hard and sure on the clay. Her back still ached. She slept like the dead and woke with the birds and walked out most mornings to a workshop full of light and the smell of fire. And she thought, not for the first time, that her son had done her the great accidental favor of his life. She did not know he was about to drive up the mountain, but she would be ready. Royce came up the mountain on a Saturday in late spring, 18 months after he'd watched his mother drive away in a borrowed truck. She saw the car first, his expensive sedan, picking its way up the dirt track that the county had finally graded once the property started drawing visitors. It stopped at the gate, and he got out and stood looking at the place, and even from the porch Odessa could see it had knocked the wind out of him. The clearing was clean now. Mowed paths, raised beds going along the south fence. The house painted white again and sound. The old slumped outbuilding had been rebuilt into a bright classroom with wide doors thrown open. And inside the wheels were turning and the women were laughing. And smoke rose thin and steady from the kiln stack against the sky full of fast spring clouds. It was beautiful. It was alive. And it belonged, every inch of it, to the mother he had measured out of a back bedroom. He came up the path slow, the way you walk into a church you've stopped believing in. Odessa stayed where she was, on the porch, with her tea and with Faye, who had no intention of leaving and made that plain by settling deeper into her chair. "Mom." Royce stopped at the steps. I don't even have a word for what this is. "Royce, this is a surprise. You look good." He swallowed. "You look really good." Mountain air. She let the silence stretch the way she'd once watched him stretch it across her own kitchen table. "What brings you all the way up here?" He glanced at Faye. Faye looked back at him with the frank, unbothered attention of a woman who has decided she is staying. Odessa took a small mercy on him and nodded, and Faye rose, slow and pointed, and said on her way past, "We'll be in the workshop. Holler if you need him removed, and let the screen door bang." They sat. For a while, Royce didn't say anything, and then it came out of him in a rush, the way confessions do. He'd been wrong. About the property, about her, about all of it. The business was struggling again, the second time, And he and Sloan were having trouble, real trouble, and he'd spent 18 months not calling because he was ashamed, and then he'd seen the documentary clip somebody sent him, his own mother on a screen, and he'd had to pull the car over. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have led with that. I'm sorry, Mom." Odessa let it sit. She did not rush to fill it or to soften it. She had earned the right to let an apology stand in the open air for a moment. "Why are you here, Royce?" she asked finally. "Did you drive 2 hours to say you're sorry? Or did you drive 2 hours because things are hard and you remembered your mother turned out to have something after all?" He looked at his hands. That was answer enough, and they both knew it. "That's not entirely fair," he said. "No," she agreed. "It isn't entirely, but it isn't entirely wrong either, and we're past the age of pretending." She told him then, plainly, what those months had been, how devastated she'd been at that table, how close she'd come to believing them, to getting small and quiet and waiting in a place with golden light in a brochure, and how the wall in the back room had cracked all of that open along with everything else. "I'm not going to give you money," she said. "There isn't any to give. This is a nonprofit now. Everything that comes and goes back into the work and the women and the land. Your grandmother's name is on it, not mine, and it's going to outlive both of us." She set down her tea. "But I'll give you what I give everybody who comes up this road not knowing what they're worth anymore. I'll give you work." He blinked. "Work? Saturdays. 7 o'clock. There's a wall of raised beds to dig and a kiln to load and 100 things your back can do that mine can't anymore. You come up and you put your hands in the dirt and you learn what your grandmother knew and what I had to lose everything to find out." She held his eyes. "That what means something isn't measured the way you've been measuring it. That's the only help I've got. Take it or drive home, and we'll go on being what we are now, which is mostly strangers." She watched her son's pride fight the rest of him, watched it the way she'd once watched weather. It took a long minute. Then he nodded. "Okay," he said. "Saturdays. Bring gloves," she said, "and bring the kids." He did. He came the next Saturday, and the one after, sullen at first, soft-handed and slow, and the women ran him ragged and did not spare him, and slowly something in him gave way and let the place in. Toby took to the wheel like he'd been waiting his whole life for it. Posey named the kiln. Sloan came too, eventually, quieter than Odessa had ever known her, and the healing between them was nothing like a clean break mended. It was more like grafted wood, the old scar always there in the grain, the new growth real, all the same. Odessa walked her mountain in the evenings, 77 now, slower but steady, checking the kiln, the beds, the lights burning late in the workshop where the women worked and laughed. She thought about how the world tells you, past a certain age, that your time is over, that your own family may agree, and how none of it has to be the story you accept. Her grandmother had made beautiful things in her own time and trusted that someone would one day know how to look. Odessa had been that someone. And now there were others learning to look on a mountain that civilization had forgotten, in a workshop a tape measure had failed to erase. The best work waits longer than a life. Her grandmother had written that, shaky-handed, in the autumn before she died, certain of almost nothing except that. She had been right. If this story moved you, tell me in one word what you'll carry away from it. Resilience, renewal, beginning. Drop your word in the comments. And let's remind each other that the most beautiful things often bloom long after the world has stopped watching for them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.